and this is Branded, and this is Branded. Hello, everyone. How are you today? I hope everything is going well in your part of the world. It's going well in my own part of the world, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to yet another episode of Branded. Now, what do we want to talk about today? I want to talk about what's in a name. Now, what's in a name? Yeah, I know that's not what I promised I will talk about. We're supposed to talk about the Adidas story, and yes, I do have the Adidas story. But I thought that it would be good, based on the feedback we've gotten so far, to talk about what's in a name. Because people are thinking, yeah, I can put any name I want. And yes, indeed, you can put any name you want. But be ready to put your shoulder, against that name to make sure that it makes sense. Now, thinking about what's in a name took me to my secondary school days when we had to study William Shakespeare. It took me specifically to his play Romeo and Juliet. And Juliet had these lines: what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. True, it will smell as sweet because a rose is a rose. It smells as sweet. That's why it has such a beautiful name. Now, how would you feel? Would you be attracted to a rose if it was called mud plant, for instance? Would we be attracted to the lotus flower if it was called swamp lily? These names, these things that we give ourselves as names, they all have certain connotations. They all have certain expectations. They draw out certain things out of us. For instance, we have in our part of the world these people that we call agberos, motor park touts. I don't know if that's a politically correct name for it, but you know what? Yeah, they help commercial vehicle drivers load on, get passengers, and they're known to be pretty rough and gruff, And if all of a sudden we call them vehicular attendants, will it stop them from being rough and tough or having that image? No, a whole lot more has to change before they can transition from being agberos to vehicular attendants, So, yeah, there's a lot in a name. There's a whole lot packed into a name. There's expectation, there's imagery, there's intrigue, there's a promise. We spoke about some of those last week, some names that we have that have a promise, like Coach Masters Academy has a promise. There's another name I forgot to include, and that's a name of a product I really like, and the owner, the manufacturer of the product called it Flower Nuts. Can you imagine what that is? Well, okay, don't imagine too much. It's what in a part of the world we call ching ching. And she didn't want to just say, come buy my ching ching. She just wanted something that sounded a little bit more exotic, something that would brand her as being distinct from other things, other products in that category. And she called it Flower Nuts. And I can tell you, because I am a strong believer in that brand, that the name matches the promise given in that name. Another feedback we got last week was that one of our viewers said that the names, especially for startups, should be as explicit as possible so that people can easily identify them. Audiences who are seeking those kind of services should easily identify them. So if, for instance, you are a legal company or a group of lawyers and you decide to call yourself the Rose Firm, it would work. I think there is actually a Rose Firm. It would work. But if you're a startup and you really need to get up and go quickly, there's so many things that you really need to put your attention to when it comes to branding and actually doing the business itself, that calling yourself the Rose Firm would require you to put a whole lot more work into it. But this is really for easy identification. We haven't even gotten to the issue of the personal brand, the people behind the names. And when we get to that, you'll see where there's an intersection. Well, thank you, Geraldine, for that feedback. And thank you for everybody else who's giving us feedback and some idea of what you would like to hear next. So, the main point I want to make about this is be intentional about naming your business. Don't let it be sentimental, especially when there's pressure, sometimes from you, sometimes from your family, pressure from family or friends, like, hey, put all our names in there, it's a family business. Yeah, there's that kind of pressure as well. Or maybe you want to sound very exotic and you sound so exotic that nobody even knows what you're talking about. Be careful, be very intentional and deliberate. So, I promised you two things in my last broadcast. I promised you the story behind Gap and the one behind Adidas. I would like to tell you the story, both stories, but we'll take one today. We'll take the Gap story and then I'll fill you in on Adidas in the next episode. The Adidas story is a little bit juicy, and we'll spill a little tea here next week, okay? So just join us and we'll spill that tea. So, about Gap, and I'm sure many of you know Gap, the Gap Inc., as it's called. But did you know that it was founded in 1969? And what comes to mind when you think about Gap? Kind of mid-range, easy to wear jeans, t-shirts, clothing. But it was founded in 1969 by Donald Fisher and his wife Doris F. Fisher in, I think it was in California, yeah, in California, yes. And it was Doris who actually named the brand The Gap. Now, why did she name that brand The Gap? She named it because she believed that what they had to sell to the public would fit in with that generation, how I put it now, there was generation gap. There's always a generation gap. So this gap, in other words, the Gap company was created and named to provide clothes that fill in that generation gap. Clothes that are not fuddy-duddy old clothes, old people clothes, and clothes that are not for little children, for that specific generation gap. And I'd say they're still doing the same thing right now because I would say, having walked in and out of different Gap stores, there's Baby Gap now, there's all kinds of Gap. You can buy Gap t-shirts, you can buy clothes from Gap, you can buy jeans, we still buy jeans from Gap. But they started off by being the sole, how do I call it now? Sole outlets for Levi Strauss jeans, and that's all they sold exclusively, Levi Strauss jeans. A lot has evolved over the years, but that is what they started with, and that is what they're still known for jeans, really. When I walk into a Gap store, except for Baby Gap, when my child was a child, when she was a baby, I would go in there to look for probably denim jackets or jeans, So that is the story behind the Gap. Did you know? I bet you didn't know, because I didn't know until I started doing this research. So what would people say when they dig behind your own brand story, the name behind your brand? Would they find something interesting? Would they find something random that you picked off? Like, if I can look out of my window now, I'll just say, oh, Yellow Rose Company. Yeah, it sounds exotic, sounds interesting, sounds intriguing, but what is it? What does it do? We need to know. Inquiring minds, curious minds want to know. So next week, join us while we talk about the Adidas story. It's a little deviation. We're going to spill a little tea, but hey, if you're eating all these cookies, you need to have a little tea to wash it down. My name is Julia Okujax, and this is Branded, and join us next week. Thank you. Take care.